So this is an optional step, and you don't have to follow it, but just know that I'm going to be using it because I don't really want to go and create different controls and set up on our project settings, okay, for any controller that we might be using. Now, I already did a bit of recording, but it got corrupted, so fortunately I didn't do much, but I'm going to show you what I already did. So we're going to include the input system onto this. Okay, so just go over here, just select show preview packages if you are not be able to see it, and install it. That's it. Then after the scripts are imported and so on and so on, you're going to have to go onto project settings, which are here, onto the player, and then down here where you have your active input handling, select this to be as an input system instead of both. Okay, click apply, and then Unity is going to force a restart. Okay, so I'm going to go onto my data folder, and now I can do a right click, create, and I'm going to create an input action. Let's call this player controls. Okay, click edit asset, and now I'm going to create a new action map. Let's call it player. Since we're only going to have locally only one player playing, then this will work fine. For actions, actions are basically the equivalent of our inputs now, or basically these array objects you have. Okay, it will have all the data, but what we are getting with this is that we do not have to set up different horizontal and vertical for each controller we have. Something like what we do here. Okay, we have the vertical, horizontal for the controller, and then we have this for the keyboard, and so on, which of course can get a little bit daunting, especially considering that all different controllers on a PC are mapped differently. So yeah, it can be a little bit of a pain to deal with that. Let's rename our action to movement, and I'm going to set up the action to pass through. Okay, I'm going to switch the control type to vector2. What that does is basically take the float from horizontal and the float from vertical, the equivalent, not the actual ones, of course. We're not using this anymore. And it creates them into a combined vector2. Okay, so basically your vertical is going to be your y, and your horizontal is going to be your x, of course. And they can go from -1 up to 1, and vice versa. Okay, so no binding. If I want to set now onto to be able to control it with the left stick, all I have to do is go to the path, just go to gamepad and switch this, or assign the left stick. Okay, just by that, and now I have a vector2. As you saw, it's pretty simple, and you can also add more, more usages to depending on what you want to add, since we have so many things and so many controllers and so many different platforms. This is really much simpler. It's a little bit hard, more complex, let's say, not hard to set up, but you will see that eventually it's worth it. So next, we have the left stick, and that will work, but we need to also assign the keys for the keyboard, and that's because, at least for playtesting, we use the keyboard a lot. Okay, so let's rename this to keyboard. And as you can see, I can assign a path to this, which basically is which key. I'm just going to set this to WASD. Keep in mind to select the correct one. Okay. And that's pretty much it for movement. Of course, we need to add all the rest of the keys, so we're going to do that in a bit. I'm going to click Save Asset, or you can enable autosave, but because, even a small change will force an autosave and then it generates a C# class, it might be a little bit daunting. So just leave it closed, just click Save Asset, and then it will, when you're done, it will generate the C# class. So you will see why that is important in a bit. So I'm going to go onto my player controls on the input action I created, and I'm going to click Generate C# class, and we can hit Apply to that. This will create us or generate our class, and you can see this has all the detail we've basically added, and of course it has a few more that we don't really need, but this is basically a generation from this from what we have in here. So how do we add this into our project? First of all, of course, we're going to have to do this onto, well, the combos will not work right now, obviously, because we're going to have to change all of that. So we're going to have to go onto our input manager and change all of this. We're still going to keep everything we have here, but we're just simply going to change this to all this section. Okay, obviously move amount can't just stay down here, but we can do one small change to this. I'll show you in a bit. Okay, so I'm just going to comment all of this out for now. Let's start with our vertical and horizontal then. Because we're going to have a vector 2, it means we're going to have to store that vector 2 into a variable, okay, so that we can access it. Let's call this move direction. Okay, then because we now are referring to classes instead of the old way we were handling inputs, which were from a single input manager, which was basically a list where you will find some things with reflection or with string comparisons and find what that class was and what value it had and so on and so on. Okay, so we now have to use classes. So we can just say controls. Because we're using a class, we're going to have to do on the controls, we're going to have to instantiate it. Now, of course, because controls is very similar to player control or to controller, and we're going to get confused a lot. Okay, I'm just going to rename this to keys or inputs or whatever. I'm just going to say keys since there's nothing else named that way. Of course, that's just my naming convention. You just do whatever you want with this. You can also call it player controls, but So looking into inside the keys, inside the class, but keep in mind you have to first have it generated. So you have to at first generate the C# class and then click apply. Otherwise, you won't do a change. Okay. You can see that we can access a few things, but what we do need right now is the player, which is, of course, is a subclass of what we do with our action maps. From that player, we can also access the movement action, which is now considered an action. So you will see here that we have a few things. We can get a few data that we're not going to need, but what we're going to use is a few things. For example, the phase. It's what phase the input is now in. If you're pressing it, it means it goes started. If you didn't, then it means you are doing something else. So I'm going to tell you which is the equivalence of on button down, on button up, and on button pressed. So cancelled, you can see that if you're using Visual Studio, you see the lighting over there. Cancelled, performed, and to started. These are now delegates, so, or well, callbacks. So you can treat them as delegates that you can add a method inside them that will happen on an event. So for example, if you add, which is what we're going to be adding, if you add inside the perform, you can add because it's an action, you can add some logic. What I want to do is I'm just going to set this as a random name, doesn't matter, I could work. And I'm going to use a lambda operation, which means for this it's going to create a method named I, and or you can just name this whatever. Okay, just going to use I, and I'm going to say that whenever this method is executed, on the move amount, move direction, assign me the I, which is of course the action, read value, and the read value I'm going to be getting is a vector 2. So basically that means whenever the mouse is down, or whenever the key is down, not the mouse, of any of my inputs, okay, it's going to be running this method. Now the trick to that is that because this is a pass through, it means it's always running. So basically it's like having this inside update. But with this we know that it's handled by the input. Okay. So basically, yeah, that's this how we get the values onto our move direction. Now, however, we need to enable this, our player controls. I don't particularly know why, but that was in the video, so I'm just going to use it. And on disable, yeah, okay, I can guess why, because if you do not want to disable if you do not want to enable a map key, then you will have issues. You don't basically want the input if you are not using it. Okay, so on disable, just disable this as well. Since this is on the input manager, it means it's only going onto the player, so that should work. So with this we have our move direction. Now, where we were using our previous input, if we switch vertical equals move direction dot x and horizontal move direction dot, yeah, this will be the x, this will be the y. Okay, save that, minimize. Now we might get an error because we haven't removed all the get buttons, or we might not get any values from it, we'll see. So let's leave this on the side and click play. We should be able to move. Okay, and I'll show you why we're moving like that. But if I take over my inputs, either that is with WASD and so on, I can move normally. And it doesn't matter if it's on WASD or if it's the left stick. Okay, I'm now moving with the left stick and now moving with the keyboard, which is super easy, and it was eventually super simple to add. One little bug is this. You can see that we get value even though I'm not pressing anything. We are getting values from that, and that has to do with the dead zone. So how do we add the dead zone? We need to go onto a movement or to any action that we might want to add, and we need to add a processor. And I'm going to do a stick dead zone. Of course, you can add more processors for a vector to normalize the vector and so on, but I think the vector we are getting is already normalized. I'm not sure on that, we have to check, but we have to do it. But for now it should be fine. Now we have the dead zone. However, I found that this default settings at least didn't work for me as I wanted. So click on the open input settings. We're going to have to create new settings. Just click there, it should be working. And I think for me at least, min at 0.2 and dead zone max fixed the problem I had. Okay, so close that. I'm going to click save asset because we have a new processor to this. Okay, we don't have to generate a new C# class because this is already ticked. It's happening automatically. Let's move this on the side. And now let's click play. And you will see that our problem is now fixed. You don't have any issue with moving, just moving when you're not pressing a stick. Of course, this is only when you're using a controller. If your input is not using a controller and you're just using the keyboards and keys on the keyboard do not have a dead zone, or don't need a dead zone, because they can just move around. Okay, so that's it for movement. Let's assign our camera. Let's assign a new action, which we're going to say camera. Binding now, it's going to be the gamepad. And actually, we need to set this first to pass through. Control type vector2. And we are going to be using the same stick dead zone, obviously, so that works for us as well. Then on the binding, we need to switch our gamepad to right stick. And that's it for the controller. Now, delete that. For the mouse, we need to add a binding and path. Instead of gamepad, we're going to go onto our mouse, and the position we're actually looking at, or where the value we actually want, is the delta position of our mouse. What's the delta position? Is a direction between the previous position you had on the mouse and the next position you're going to on the position you have on this frame. Okay, after that, click Save Asset, and let's go back into our input manager. As you can see, we have down here the mouse X and the mouse Y. But first, we need to assign a vector2 for the camera direction, camera movement, camera direction. Then we're going to go down here and we're going to do the same thing. Camera performed, and once this is happening, all you're going to be doing is camera direction, read value of vector2. Okay, so mouse X, mouse Y, camera direction dot X, mouse Y, camera direction dot Y. Save that, minimize, and we can try this out. Hit play. Now, it's super fast on the mouse, but yeah, well, it's actually super fast on both. But that has to do with how we rotate our camera and not how we read the speeds. So let's see. We have our look speed, pivot speed. I think it's one of those. So let's say look speed. Let's set this to 1 and pivot speed to 1 as well. Let's see how that's going to. That's way too fast. So let's do 0.1. 0.01. Okay, now that's much better. Maybe that's too slow, but you can see that we're getting that. We are rotating around normally as we want. Either the mouse like this, or with the controller. Okay, so let's switch this to maybe let's do 0.2, or let's just try 0.03. So that's it for our camera. Up till now, these two were pretty similar. Okay, which meaning are control types of vector2s. So how do we do buttons? Let's do the attack buttons at first. Let's assign a new action. Since we are not using a vector2 or pass-through, we are instead using a button now, we can just leave this on the button. Let's rename this to right bumper. On my binding, I'm going to go and say on my gamepad, use the key, which is of course right shoulder. Right shoulder, right bumper. Okay, you get the idea. And I'm going to add one more binding, which this one is going to just be, let's assign this to R, which means R keyboard. And actually, is it on the keyboard? Yeah. Okay, of course, feel free to, for the keyboard, feel free to use whatever you want with this. So that is now going to be our input for the right shoulder, or right bump, or whatever. Click Save Asset. And since now we're not going to be using a key, and it's not a pass-through, so that means it's going to be using the performed and the, actually, let's try this. Let's say keys.player.rb.performed. Okay, this is a test. Don't know if it's going to work. And let's say that RB input we have equals I.phase. That's equals I.phase equals input system phase dot performed, or maybe started. Okay, so that means that on our right bumper it's going to turn it to true when this is pressed. But I think since this is not, since this is not a pass-through, that this might not work. We'll see. Let's leave this on the side and click play. And it actually just worked, but it keeps playing. Okay, I'm not pressing anything. It keeps playing. So that means we're going to have to cancel it somehow. And I think it's because, this is performed. So let's say we change this to a pass-through, and the control type is going to be set as a button. Save that. Now, let's try it again. Let's hit play. Yeah, it keeps playing. So, let's just use it simple as a button, and we'll fix the rest. So, my result of this, or how we can save this, is to basically do two things. We can either add a method inside keys.player.rb.started, which is going to be turning the RB to true. Yeah, that is I. Okay, and then on cancelled equals false. Okay, which can get a little bit daunting and it's too much work. So let's try something else. Let's go on the debug log here and say player controls or keys, dot player dot rb dot phase. And of course, the cool cats among you will know where this is going. Okay, you can say that this is waiting, so that means we can just set, if the phase is waiting, we can just set this to false. If it started, we can just set it to true. Okay, so simply put, we can just say that rb equals keys.player.rb.phase equals performed. Was it performed or just started, I guess. Delete that and let's try it out. And voila, we get it. Okay, and it plays normally. And of course it works from the controller as well without having to worry too much about it. And apparently our combos work as well. That's weird. Pretty sure we didn't do. Anyway. Okay, so that's for RB. Next, we can just duplicate this. Do LB. From right shoulder, switch that to left shoulder. From R key, let's do Q. Okay, since this is the same logic for everything, let's just duplicate the rest. I'm just doing this for, you know, completeness sake. You could just you can just stop the video and move the rest, or just move forward on the video. Okay, I'm going to put Z to this. Of course, feel free to add Shift, Control, Alt, or whatever you want with this. Or you can also add even more. So if you want to say it will be working with Z, but it will also be working with left shift, you can just add it like this. Okay. Now I don't really need left shift, so remove that. So we have RB, LT, RB. Let's close the camera. Let's close this, LB, LT. Oops, I didn't want the binding. Yeah, that's annoying. Whenever we add one more, I think it's going to be expanding all of them. Yeah. RT, which stands for right trigger. And let's put this as T. Okay. And here's the another cool thing is that we can get another binding for a key. Oops, not that binding. I mean to say a new. Actually, can we? Yeah, okay. That will be a little bit better. Duplicate this. Let's call this lock. On instead of right trigger, I'm going to set this to right stick press. Okay, and that will be our lock key. I'm going to set this to F. Let's see, what else do we have? We have lock key. And of course we can also add an action for a value, which is going to be returning us a value and a button, and maybe we could add, yeah, we have with two modifiers. If you want to do Control Shift and Control Alt and so on and so on. Oh, we also have a roll button. So let's add a new action. Add, or just duplicate this, I guess, for roll. Let's see. For roll, I'm going to add on a gamepad. Button east, north, southwest is basically your circle, square, X, and triangle, yeah. And on an Xbox controller, which is what I'm using, is the X, A, B, and Y. So I'm just going to set this as to button east, which is the B key for me. Okay, and for all, I'm just going to set this to left shift. So I think that's all for now. Just click Save Asset, and we're basically just going to use whenever we're using the get button and all that, just paste this in here. We're going to switch this and replace it on all of them. And of course, instead of RB, we're going to set this to RT, LB, LT, and that's pretty much it. Of course, we could just also do get button as our own phase, or yeah, we can encapsulate that. For example, you could say bool get button status, and you need to pass the input phase, and say if phase equals started, return true, or just return this, and then change that to, let's say, let's delete all of this, and in here I want to say get button status, and then go down here to here, and come on, okay, yeah, okay, we can just make this down here and delete this. Okay, so you don't have to write all these long lines all the time. And since the rest are actually working the same way, let's see, where's the role input? We can also change now the lock key. So let's see if we have it. Is attacking input, okay. Lock input. Get button status keys dot player dot lock dot phase, and switch this to lock input. Okay, the role button is the B input. Keys dot player dot role dot phase. Okay, obviously we could just ignore the RBs and just use ifs to this, but I think this is a little bit of a better way to do this. Okay, so save that. Let's see, we forgot to close something. Yeah, we don't need this bracket, this parenthesis. Okay, it's compiled, and I think just clicking play now, it should allow us to play normally, and it does. We can do rolls, we can attack with both controls, we have all our keys set. Okay, and of course I can press in the thumbstick and I can lock onto a guy. Now, what we want to avoid, however, on the lock-on, as you can see here, I'm actually pressing down the lock-on. So that's kind of an issue now. We don't want, if we have it pressed down, we don't want this behavior. We want to avoid that, even if it's the player choice. Okay, if it's the player choice, that doesn't mean it's an intelligent choice. It means a player might not be intelligent. Oops. So, in this case then, instead of setting this as a log input, I'm going to go on start, and I'm going to just say that keys.player.lock.started. Just add me a method in here which is going to take my lock input, turn it to true. Okay, this will turn it to true, but we also need to turn it to false. So cancelled, lock input equals false. And now this method is the equivalent of writing get button and get button down. Okay, this will only work once this is down. Of course, if I wanted to have this as lock input or get button up, where we are doing that, then I will add long input to true, but at the start of a frame, when it cancelled, at the start of the frame, I will also reset my log input to false. Okay, if I wanted to do get button up, we usually, I think, pretty much I never do that or never use it. And actually, I think that didn't work either. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it doesn't work because it gets cancelled. So maybe not this way. Let's see. Maybe we shouldn't try this as a log input. So basically, I'm just going to say, yeah, I'm going to remove the cancel version. The started will turn into true once you press it. And I'm just going to go and say that if the branch method for log input is on, then log input set this to false. So it's going to be used as a flag and not as an input, if you get the idea. So basically what the flag is, when something happens, an event or whatever, we raise the flag, and once that is done, we lower the flag. So basically it's like your mailbox. Once there is mail inside, you raise the flag, and taking outside, you lower the flag, just so you know that there's no mail in there. Okay, and now pressing it down won't really do much. I'm holding it at the moment, but basically just does nothing because we've already raised the flag, but we changed it. Let's see. Perfect. Awesome. So that's basically it for implementing the new input system. It's a little bit complex. You basically just need to have a little bit more thought onto your inputs, like the previous one. It's certainly usable if you have a project that you aim to take into a higher level. That's my opinion. But it's not that fast for just rapid prototyping. So we're not going to be seeing the input system on all of the projects we're aiming to do, but we are going to be seeing it on a few ones. Okay, so if we're and I'd say at first just use the regular input manager we were always using before and what we had in Unity since forever. And once you are at a happy position, just switch to the input system. You see that it wasn't really that big of a problem. So yeah, that's pretty much it. As always, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and if you like to see more videos, more series, more of everything from what we are doing on the channel, including of course the Souls-like series. A lot of big things are coming to this, by the way. I have a lot of surprises for you if you like the Souls-like series. And yeah, more on that later. So that's it. As always, like, subscribe, and support on Patreon so we can keep making all of these beautiful things we're making. I'll see you next time.